All right, recording has started, and this is the April 6th, 2023 Crossplane Community Meeting. I will throw a link to the agenda document into the Zoom chat right now, so you can join us in the doc there and add any topics of your choosing to it so that we can get to all of them today. The biggest focus by far today is going to be the discussion we have scheduled later on for the proposal to break up large providers that Nick will be leading for us. So that's the big topic today, and the one that we'll be reserving the most time for. I think we will have plenty of time for it. There's not like other items that are heavy in the agenda, so we'll get to that for sure and have plenty of time on it. All right. So let's jump into milestones. We've got some patch releases that went out recently. We've got an upcoming big 1.12 release. Let's jump into all of it. So on Monday, we drove the 1.11.3 patch release. This was affecting an issue in composition functions for any early adopters that have been trying out that alpha feature. There was a complication with it being able to run with newer versions of crun, specifically starting at 1.8. So there was a fix in here that sorted that out, and composition functions should generally be running in most environments again. I haven't heard any feedback since the patch release that it's not working for folks. So this should unblock, I believe, a fair amount of further adoption and feedback of composition functions. So please do keep all that feedback coming, and definitely very grateful for to Andrew for that fix to get composition functions running again. So that went out on that 1.11.3 release went out on Monday, and we don't have any other upcoming patch releases that are currently scheduled with the 1.12 release coming up soon, but we will keep an eye on any issues that come up or things that get fixed and backported, and do a release for them as needed. So here we go for 1.12. So we are pretty close now. Let's look at the community calendar again, just for a quick visual. So we are pretty close now to the feature freeze. So feature freeze is 2 weeks before the scheduled release that will be on April 25th. So on Tuesday is the feature freeze. So we're hoping to get all outstanding feature work or larger scale items merged in and completed by Tuesday. And then a week following that is the code freeze date, where so in between feature and freeze and code freeze, we will focus on bug fixes, stabilization, getting things generally working more smoothly, and that will be the focus until the 18th. And then after that, we're hoping to just bake it for one more week and then do the release on the 25th. So we are in the last home stretch here of just about 2.5 weeks left until the release. So let's bring up the release board here. And then I guess, Jean, in that context, we can talk about some of the features that your team is working on too, but we'll look at those on the board specifically. Right, this probably should be bigger, I think. All right, so big features that were being focused on for 1.12 here were observe-only resources, composition validations, and pluggable secret stores were 3 big ones. I know Jesse was also focusing on package signature validation. And see what else were there big features that were in focus. I think that's about it. There's other bug fixes and stuff, but those are the 3 or 4 main big features being focused on. So I don't know exactly who is on the call here for the engineers that were driving these features, but Jean, if you want to take these top 3 big features and kind of give us the status updates that you had lower in the doc, we can just do that now if you want.
Yeah, so I'll start with pluggable secret stores. So the functionality is complete. I actually just realized we've got Ezgi on the call here. Ezgi, how about you give the update on secret stores, since you're the developer behind it?
Yeah, sure. So we have merged all the core functionality in the Crossplane and Crossplane runtime repositories. What is left is we need to consume those changes in the provider so that we can enable the functionality on that level. In addition to that, we need some documentation updates. and we have one bug in the scope, so I'm gonna tackle it in the next week.
And I said, Ezgi, so the updates in providers, like to consume it or use this type of functionality, is not necessarily tied to the 1.12 timeline, right? That can be done on provider release timelines on their own.
That's correct, but we might need some additional PRs on Crossplane or runtime so that we are not going to break providers when someone enables the functionality, because we are going to introduce some certificates for mutual authentication, MTLS authentication, and those certificates are going to be mounted to providers, and we are generating them in the Crossplane init container. So there is some kind of dependency, and currently I'm working on make this upgrade smoother, and we might need some changes on these repositories as well. But as you said, it's not fully dependent on the code free side.
Got it. Okay, thanks for that update then, Ezgi. That sounds great. And then John, I was looking, I didn't see Hassan or Philippe on the call today. So if you want to go ahead and take the updates then for those two features, then that sounds good.
Sorry, I was muted there. So on observability resources, we're finally back to focusing on that with external secret stores, wrapping up. And we're busy with implementing the functionality in Upjet. And the next iteration of outbound official providers will come with the functionality with observability resource capability when it lands in Crossplane. And we'll also be creating documentation to show how non-Upjet based providers can integrate the functionality. And I believe Hassan is also planning on implementing it on one of the community providers as a reference implementation to show it there. So we're mostly kind of like just in the kind of like PR review phase at the moment for wrapping up the functionality here, and we'll likely be able to wrap that up next week, and then move on to documentation. And then on composition validation, so we've decided to split this into 3 phases. The first phase has already been merged and kind of like introduces the webhook as well as some logical validation. And the second phase is where we're implementing schema validation, and that's currently in progress. We believe that we should be able to get that in time for 1.12. But the third phase is unlikely going to be able to get in, which is to do with rendering validation. So we will have composition validation functionality, but there will be more to come in further releases down the pipe.
And John, do you know if there were follow-up issues that were open for the other phases, like rendering validation stuff, or is that all still going to be captured or tracked, as by this parent here?
It's in the design document. So if the design doc was merged as well recently, so you can see the 3756 reference there at the top. So if you go there, it's all covered in the design document.
Got it. Okay. And then from a tracking perspective, though, like the 1476, just leaving that open until everything's done.
Yeah, that'll kind of like be like the parent issue for this feature. We might want to consider closing it down. There's still a bit of discussion we want to have around the rendered validation. There's a little bit of uncertainty still about that, but we might consider closing that issue once the schema validation lands, and then we can open a new issue to track the further improvements.
Got it. Okay. And then here is the section, it looks like, then that kind of goes into the details about the 3 different phases of validation. Okay. Got it.
That's correct.
Very useful. Okay, great. All right, then we are back to the board here. Let's see then if there are other issues that folks want to mention here. I was looking for the issues that Hassan had open around exponential backoff for creation scenarios as well as update scenarios. Were those merged and completed?
I believe that if I got to the back off,
Yeah, back off
here was closed today. So I believe that was merged.
Awesome. That is fantastic. Why? Oh, I should just look for back off here.
Yeah, 3840.
Sweet. Both for status
yes,
updates
both.
and creation. Okay, that's fantastic. So both
Correct.
of those being in core functionality for 1.12, and then I saw I think some open PRs for consuming like those new predicates essentially in other providers as well. So that's really good that that got addressed for 1.12. That was definitely a concerning issue, and I'm really happy to see that taken care of. Excellent work, Hassan, for driving that. If you watch the recording later on, otherwise you'll never know I said that. Okay, cool. So are there other things, Bob, I know you're on the call here. I wanted to get a quick check for you. Did you make some progress on these two like default value supports for policy stuff and compositions?
I've made, I guess that's a good way of putting it, some progress. It's stuff that I'm just trying to finish putting together so that I can actually test it. And it's just having the time to do it. I'm hoping to get to it this weekend. And if I make it, great. If I don't, I won't. So yeah, I would love to have these. I would love to have these. It's just a matter of having the time to finish it up. So
yep, totally understood. Is there anything that's like obviously a blocker for you at this point, Bob, besides time? Like, did you need like a decision or a feedback on anything for the implementation, or is it's just time is the only enemy here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little fuzzy on the implementation only because I'm not real familiar with that kind of whole section of the code. I'm basically taking, copying an existing implementation for something similar and doing the same things and kind of hoping that that's the right thing to do. If I get to where I have something, I may try to run it past, see if somebody can take a look at it. Just tell me, yeah, that's right, or no, it's not.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. Okay, then something else I want to call out. Then two more things I want to call out. So Dan has been focusing. I don't know the status of it though, and I think he is tied up right now and not on this call. So Dan has been focusing on some improvements to the package manager, more specifically, and I think most urgently as well, in my opinion, is the improved revision resource ownership transition. So you'd install a new version of a package, and then the package manager has to go through the effort of assigning the resources from the old version to the, being owned by the new version, essentially. And so Dan is working on some improvements to that, and I'm hoping to see those in 1.12 as well, because I guess I could say anecdotally, but I feel like I have seen a little bit more issues coming up around upgrades and reliability for those. So I, can't really speak authoritatively and have a lot of data on that, but I feel like this is something that's coming up on the radar more, and having some improvement in the reliability and being able to have smooth upgrades very, very, very consistently is something that I am definitely interested in as well. Jean, did you hear anything from Dan about his progress on that work in the package manager, or is that a bit of a unknown until we get a status from him?
I don't have any additional context right now.
Okay, cool. And Christopher, I saw you came off mute for just a minute there. Did you have a comment to make on the package manager fixes as well?
Yeah, we had a lot of issues in the past 2 weeks with the package manager. For example, if you're switching from community Crossplane to universal Crossplane from Upbound, because everything was breaking in our infrastructure regarding this thing. So we had a lot of trouble with this. So I was talking with Dan regarding this issue, and we are a lot of issues in Crossplane and also in Upbound and Universal Crossplane about this. So in general, this is a little bit an issue with the version numbers, what you're configuring. If, for example, in community crossplane, you're using version numbers like 1.11.3, and in universal crossplane, you're using something like 1.11.3 minus up.3, something like this. And if you're switching between both, everything breaks up in your configurations you have applied in the cluster. And then, I don't know, you have problems with double entries in the log. And then everything stops working, Crossplane stops running providers in the cluster, and you need to fix a lot of things. For example, you need to fix the owner reference for all the compositions, something like this, and you need to do this by hand. So I think this is a critical issue at the moment if you're switching between them.
Yeah, okay, that's good validation then, Christopher, that provides a bit more concrete data points to the anecdotal one that I was feeling myself, that this seems like more of a hot issue than it has been in the past. So I don't know if there's maybe something that was driving like a recent regression, or if there's just, it's being stressed more in scenarios that it hadn't been stressed in before. I'm not quite sure. But that, you know, your experience there does add more support towards the urgency of addressing and fixing this. So thank you for sharing that, dude. Yep. And then so I'm getting a lot of feedback as well from folks in the community about environment configs, where, you know, folks have adopted it, they're using it, and, you know, there's a number of things we want to do there to further mature it and declare it out of alpha and into beta. So there's been a lot of discussion recently in terms of feedback of like, what should we do to mature this to beta? And I'm hearing a lot of engagement and, you know, desire from a number of people to continue investing in this. And, you know, so we can take it, you know, mature it and then have it be reliably dependent upon in more production scenarios. So I'm feeling like this is becoming more of a priority. And like, so the current phase here is, you know, we're discussing and deciding, and Max is providing his opinions, et cetera, on what exactly should we fix or invest into, you know, as we mature the API. I think that there's still some debate on behaviors such as, you know, you make a change to it and does it get patched only in memory, or does it go back to a persistent storage of the environment config, and what's the expectation there? So there's more things to talk about, I think, and I would like to see investments in this specifically in the 1.13 timeframe to kind of take a lot of these and mature environment configs, because there is a lot of engagement, there's a lot of adoption of it, and it does seem like something that's pretty valuable. So I wanted to make a note on that for everybody. Okay, sweet. So before we get off of the release board, anything else that folks want to bring up for 1.12 as we go into the final 2 weeks ish of the release lifecycle? All right. Cool. Then I wanted to make a note to everybody as well, is that, you know, we were just looking at our roadmap board, right? But I don't think it's ideal in terms of the experience you would want to have from a more roadmap perspective. You know, it's a good experience now if you want granularity of what's being worked on, what's the status of it, all that sort of stuff. But if you just wanted to, you know, come to the project and see what's on the horizon, what are the big investments that the community wants to make, et cetera. So I'm going to be spending some time, started on it yesterday a little bit, and I'll follow up more today. But this week, I should see some improvements into the releases board there to give it a more roadmap feel or roadmap view. So it can be used not only for more granular issue tracking and milestone tracking, but more high level roadmap items for, you know, more future looking sort of things that will be available as well. And so improving the discoverability of it too, like linking to it from the main README and stuff like that, so that this becomes a more useful public roadmap for the project. So you should see some improvements on that as well coming up. Now, keep in mind that that won't, it will be in, the intent of it is to give an idea of where the project is going, but not necessarily making, you know, hard commitments on, yep, this feature is going to be available on this date, but more giving visibility, insight, discoverability, all that sort of stuff into the direction of the project and the general priority of what the community thinks is important.
It's going to be
Nick, did you have a point to make there too?
More of a question that very much relates to what you just said about no specific dates. My understanding is it's kind of going to be like a filtered view of the current project board, right? To only show the sort of status and ordering of the big ticket items, right? So it's not really going to have any dates attached to it at all, is my understanding, but it will be kind of ordered by what we're planning to work on first. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it's so exactly like the GitHub projects, you know, is functionality is what I was intending on using, where it would be another view into the same underlying data source. So, you know, it'd be like a filter, you go roadmap view and you'd see, oh, cool, this is the, you know, the big ticket items and the ordering, general ordering, top to bottom, that they would be, you know, attacked in. And then potentially, you know, like, because we do have milestone values as well, like we have some clarity on, yep, we want to do this in 1.13 or this won't be done until 1.14 type of thing. If we have that clarity, then, you know, associating those milestones with the tickets like we've already been doing would be part of that view as well.
That makes sense.
Sweet. All right. So I think we can move on then to provider releases and such. Jean, I will let you take away all these provider updates and performance and everything like that. I think that's a big thing to talk about.
Yeah, so basically all the providers there except for Terraform comes with the latest improvements in resource utilization from Upchat. And you know, we've seen some validation both from community members, but also you know, outbound product of the improvements that it's had. I just want to make people aware that the provider AWS 0.32.0 had an issue, and we actually pulled it from the marketplace because it could lead to like a upgrade trap, where because of an upstream fix, any of the resources that had the word fleet in it became fleets, because the pluralization changed due to the upstream fix. And we kind of like addressed that and released the patch fix for that. So don't look for 0.320, go straight to 0.321. Yeah, and then I saw Yuri was on the call. There was a 0.6 release for Terraform and also 0.7. Yuri, do you want to give an update on that quickly?
Yeah, the latest one was with Terraform RC support. So one of provider Terraform users were requesting it from a perspective of support of a private Terraform registry to pull the models from there. So Terraform RC support propagation into provider Terraform bot solves that problem. And there was also, I think, reconciliation loop optimization. Is it right, Bob? If I recall correctly, in the latest out of schedule release? Yeah,
there's a couple of things. We no longer run Terraform init on every reconciliation. We generate a checksum of the directory that holds all of the state information, and if nothing has changed, you know, we still regenerate the module and all the stuff from the spec, but if nothing has changed in the checksum of that directory, then we don't run Terraform init, which saves a considerable amount of time, and then we run Terraform plan as usual. And then we also did pull in the desired state change event filter from the discussion earlier that Hassan had worked on.
Thanks for those updates, guys. And sorry, I was fumbling on my screen here to try to get into the release notes, and like GitHub was trying to redirect me to sign in with the SSO stuff. So I was I'm here now, though, just as you were finishing the last note there, Bob. So there's the release notes. And then Jean, did you have any more to say about, yeah, did you want to go over also the, like sizing guide and stuff like that too?
Yeah, I mean, we can just make folks aware of it. We've done a lot of load testing, obviously in a very constrained environment, and your mileage will vary in production, but we've been able to validate, like kind of like north of 25% improvement, and we saw similar and more improvements on outbound side. So we did want to put out a kind of like just a rough sizing guide for where things are right now with regards to, if you want to run the outbound providers. And those should be kind of like considered minimum requirements to successfully run those providers. Your specific use case, and based on your combination of we've documented some command line options like the max reconcile rate and pull intervals and all sorts of things there that you can read through. But any kind of like one of those levers that you pull could have an impact on it, and so we've also introduced some observability to allow you to observe the object runtime better, to understand the impact of these things. And Jared, if you can go to the next tab there that you opened, the monitoring one. We've given some guidance as to how you can go about having a look at that in Grafana.
Awesome, Sean. So I think that this is really helpful that, not only are there performance improvements to the code base, but I think these artifacts or these documents here about, a sizing guide and how to monitor and all that sort of stuff is very useful to accompany those code changes there, so that we can stay ahead of and be aware of, issues in the future and keep tracking how we're progressing and all that sort of stuff. So those are very useful artifacts to include as well. All right, fantastic. If folks have other recent provider releases, I checked the announcements channel on the Crossplane Slack workspace, and I didn't see any other ones since the community meeting, but do feel free to add more provider releases and links here in the agenda document if you have more. All right, so I think we talked through the big features here. Oh, and then let me check the chat real quick, because I think there's some activity going on in there. Looks like Nick, you were addressing Raul's question there. Is there anything we want to bring up for the broader discussion, or leave it in chat?
Hi, Jared, Raul this side. So, sorry, actually, the reason I brought this up was because in my team, right, a lot of people get confused because we are kind of in process of migrating our workloads from the ACK and ASO controllers to Crossplane. So a lot of times people are confused that they think that the Crossplane providers, especially the community providers, are just using the ASO and the ACKs, and it's the Crossplane is just a wrap around it. So that's why I just wanted to confirm and get some thoughts around it.
I can try and answer this somewhat quickly. I can understand why folks might think that. We have back in the day collaborated with the ACK team and the ASO team, so both of them have experimented with various levels of success at helping us generate Crossplane providers. So there are no Crossplane providers, to my knowledge, that sort of wrap those tools as such, but they are in some cases generated from the same code generation pipelines as those tools. They like share a code gen pipeline basically. But there is no Crossplane is relatively unopinionated about how you build providers. So taking Upbound's official providers, for example, they do not use ACK or ASO or anything like that. So there's not really like a standard way to build providers.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Nick, Jared. That helps. Thank you so much.
No worries.
All right, great. Yeah, thanks for the good question there. Okay, so yeah, so then in the vendor update section for Upbound here, we have these three features that that John already talked about. And then we mentioned before we started the recording here that a fair amount of Upbounders are at a little launch party today because we had a fairly big launch for a SaaS offering around Crossplane and what we're doing with our Upbound product there. So there's a blog link there. You can read more details about it if you want to get into that there. But an exciting week for Upbound for sure. We can roll that on into the community topics section for content. So two big things to mention is that we did finish the security, the fuzzing specifically, the fuzzing security audit with AdaLogix and the CNCF. We've talked about that as an ongoing thing for quite a while now, but we did release a blog post and the full report about their findings and everything is available for folks to dive into more deeply. So do get into that if you're interested in hearing more about how the fuzzing security audit went. And also, the security, we're going to roll that into a full security audit with the same folks at AdaLogix, brokered by and supported by the CNCF that starts on Monday. So more security stuff will be coming, and that's only a good thing for maturing the project. And then Mauricio wrote a very great blog post as a guest author on the Crossplane blog about combining Crossplane and Dapper together. And it was a very natural fit for provisioning resources with Crossplane and then being able to discover and consume them via Dapper and via client developer code. So definitely a useful blog post and a practical one there to kind of give an idea of how those two projects work together in harmony. So definitely interesting stuff. And then we got a couple other interesting new blog posts as well for folks to click into. So let's keep on rolling then. And we definitely want to have more time for this. So I just wanted to make a quick note that Vault as a secret store option for Crossplane has, as he was talking about, in general, we've created the ability for secret stores to be pluggable and to be external to the Crossplane source code tree, so they can have their own shipping mechanisms, et cetera. And so Vault, as an implementation of the secret store for Crossplane, was moved to a new repository and outside of the Crossplane code base. So the internal one has been deprecated for now, and the expectation is to start moving towards, if you're consuming that feature, towards using the external, the pluggable version instead. So there's a link here for more information on that. You're not directly affected by it in this release because we're just marking it as deprecated in this release, and then in a future release we'll remove it as completely once we have some confidence that folks are being able to migrate on. But more details can be found in this particular link right here. All right, and with that, with that, I'll turn the floor over to Nick to start walking through the proposal of breaking up our providers and installing fewer CRDs and fielding questions about that. Nick, did you want to share your screen so you can point at things on the doc and the proposal?
Yeah, sure. Just give me a second.
Cool. Sounds good.
All right, can folks see that screen that's being shared?
Yep, can see it.
Nice. All right. Apologies in advance, everyone. I am not a morning person, and these meetings are always in my morning, so I'm still waking up. So apologies, my brain is not working as well as it could be. I'm going to assume that folks are at least somewhat familiar with the problems that we're facing here and what the proposal is. It is third most recent pull request or fourth most recent pull request on Crossplane if you want to pull it up locally. But the quick summary is, as I'm sure many of you are aware, Crossplane, in particular Crossplane providers, install a lot of CRDs. They add support for a lot of managed resources, and we do that by using Kubernetes CRDs. This has caused issues for people. The overwhelmingly, as to my knowledge, the most impactful issue has been performance issues. I think the Kubernetes API server and tools, the ecosystem in general was sort of built with this assumption that, you know, maybe the one day there'll be like 50 or 100 CRDs or something like that in a cluster, not, you know, thousands, which is what you can get if you install a lot of outbound providers. In particular, the big ones you can see actually you can actually kind of see in this list. This is not necessarily exhaustive. I might have missed some, but by and large, there's like, let's say, fewer than 10 providers that actually install a lot of CRDs. Many providers in the long tail only install 2 or 3 CRDs. You know, provider Terraform, provider Helm, provider Kubernetes, provider SQL, etc. All of these ones have a small handful of CRDs. So it's not a problem for all providers. It's in my mind, it's more a provider scoping. If you say a provider is scoped at AWS, then all of AWS corresponds to, you know, 900 APIs. This number is a little bit out of date as well because there's slightly newer versions of these providers available. So the primary issue that folks have faced is performance. We've written a lot about this that is linked from this design if you want to look at it in more detail, but the primary performance impacts are there's CPU and memory consumed at the Kubernetes API server when you load up a CRD. At one point, it was taking about 4 meg of memory per CRD. I believe it's down quite a lot now, but it also depends on, you know, what version of Kubernetes you're running, because there's been just incremental improvements to Kubernetes over the last couple of releases. Pardon me. The other issue that we've seen is one thing that makes that particularly painful is that most folks who are running on a cloud vendors or cloud providers managed services like GKE, EKS, AKS, etc. don't have any control over what the size of the control plane is, and most cloud vendors don't, to my knowledge, scale their control planes on this axis. So, for instance, a lot of cloud providers will actually, behind the scenes, they'll start your Kubernetes control plane out pretty small. And then as you add nodes and other well-known signals that sort of imply that indicate that the cluster doing more work or will do more work is getting bigger, they'll like give you bigger and bigger nodes and more compute for your control plane. Most folks don't do that for CRDs at the moment, to my knowledge. So often the control plane kind of just doesn't know that it's getting loaded and starts to get killed. And you actually have like dropouts, and you know you hit CPU limits, and the API server can't respond to your requests in time and things like that. So there's sort of client-side problems. Sorry, there's server-side problems. There are also client-side problems that really comes down to every CRD that you load, you can think of as another endpoint in REST API. So you know v1/AWS/RDS instances, v1/AWS/EKS clusters, or whatever. So when you have all of those endpoints, there are some parts of the Kubernetes sort of client-server communication patterns where a client will go and hit every one of those endpoints to discover what exists. Or if you do something like, hey, kubectl, get me all the managed resources, the way that kubectl is implemented is like, okay, first I'm going to figure out what managed resources are. So I'll ask the API server, hey, what's a managed resource? The API server comes back and says, hey, there's these 2,000 different kinds of managed resource. And then kubectl says, great, I'll send an HTTP request to every one of those 2,000 endpoints to ask if there's any instances. And then you know, the clients will end up rate limiting themselves arguably unnecessarily, and that slows things down. And it just results in a poor user experience, basically. We've known about this problem for a long time, and for a long time, our position on it was an idealistic one. It was Kubernetes should be better at this, basically. Like Kubernetes should not have these performance issues. So we and others as well made quite a lot of progress on updating Kubernetes, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to make the problem go away, especially the rate at which our resource coverage is increasing in Crossplane. And the other thing that we found is just even, you know, if we fix this problem 100% in Kubernetes 1.27, let's say the performance problems just go away. It takes a long time for every, you know, cloud providers have to like vet and test and carefully roll out the new versions of these Kubernetes components, and then, you know, similarly their customers need to carefully roll them out, etc., etc. So we regularly hear from people, hey, this is really painful and I'm still running Kubernetes 1.24 or something like that, which is, you know, a fairly old version these days. But folks, you know, understandably, like, I don't really want to have to update to the absolute latest bleeding edge Kubernetes just to support all of these CRDs in Crossplane. And a lot of the time that's because folks, no one really wants all of these CIDs. Basically, like Crossplane installs all these CIDs. It's arguably like a clean and simple model, but it's adding hundreds of CIDs that folks aren't using. For example, if you install provider AWS, it's about 900, and folks really want like 10 of those or something like that, or 20 or 30 or 50. So we started to look more seriously into ways to, the way I like to think of it is improving the ratio of installed to used CIDs. So in like the perfect ratio is 1-to-1. CIDs just don't get installed unless you actually intend to use them. And then a poor ratio is like you want to manage only RDS instances and you install all of provider AWS, so you get like a 900-to-1 installed to used ratio. The two solutions that I'm aware of that we walked through that could actually help with this were one thing that the community has sort of landed on or been asking for a long time, which is this idea of filtering or allowing you to configure what types a particular provider installs. And the other idea, which is what I'm proposing, is that we break up providers into break up the big providers into smaller units. Another idea that I won't talk about too much here was we did investigate whether it was possible to sort of lazy load CIDs on demand into the API server, but we found that only helped with API server performance. It didn't necessarily help with a lot of the client side issues. So specifically what I'm proposing here is that basically we as a community take the biggest providers and we break them up by API group. So taking provider AWS as the somewhat pathological case here, because of the biggest provider with, I believe, most API groups, provider AWS would stop being one provider with 900 CIDs, and don't let this number scare you too much, would become 150 providers, each with a smaller amount of CIDs. The reason I say don't let that number scare you is I think a lot of people see 150 and are like, wow, that's a lot of providers to install, but keep in mind, you almost certainly won't install most of those. Everyone's saying, I don't want these 900 CIDs, so therefore you probably wouldn't want all 150 providers that provider AWS would become. I ran a Poly survey on the Crossplane Slack a couple of weeks ago, and also reached out to a lot of Upbound sort of folks that we know, customers of Upbound and things like that. And based on those numbers, today, the average customer, and keep in mind the average customer, some folks run way more than this, but the average customer or average Crossplane community member uses 2 providers. So that might be like provider AWS and provider Helm, or provider Google and provider Kubernetes, or provider Azure and provider Terraform, right? Like it's not really, we never really thought that folks would just be running one provider and that's it. As best we can tell with the numbers and estimates we've got so far, under this proposal, the average community member, again, the average, some people would run fewer, some people would run more, would be running about 10 providers. So instead of running 2 provider pods, you'd be running 10 provider pods, basically. And so because we'd be breaking this down on API group, which corresponds mostly to cloud provider service, you would imagine that instead of provider AWS, you might install provider AWS EC2 and provider AWS EKS. Similar for Google, Azure, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the concerns that folks had when we first started discussing this covered in this design document. One of them is references between resources. Quick version of that is I think that as long as we continue to build things from a monorepo, those should be okay for the medium term or the short term. And medium term, we've kind of already decided that the way references work today, cross-resource references, so like BPCID ref, BPCID select, all that kind of stuff, is not ideal. We would rather move towards a more generic solution. You already can't, for example, reference from a Terraform provider, like from provider Terraform to provider AWS or provider Helm to provider AWS. So we'd like to solve that. We think that we can go away, basically. Another one was provider configs. We believe that all of these providers can share provider config by taking dependency on a provider package, a config package. I'm not going to go into detail on this because I want to give you all time to chat about this. And finally was the compute resources. Our pathological case for compute resources are the Upbound official providers, which do use Terraform under the hood, and that's pretty resource intensive. We do actually think that there would be a non-trivial, at least. I don't know how huge it would be, but there would be an increase in compute resource usage at first under this proposal. One of the reasons we're not super concerned about this is because we just believe that there's a ton of room for improvement here. And in fact, these numbers that I have here, I believe already out of date, and we've already made more improvements than what are captured here. So we're not too concerned about this because we just have only just begun to optimize provider performance and compute usage. Part of the reason that I'm proposing breaking up providers rather than filtering is that I believe it is the conceptually simpler thing, especially if I try to imagine the perspective of someone new to the Crossplane community. I think filtering makes a lot of sense to people who are already advanced power users who are there and are running these providers and are already used to Crossplane working in a certain way and have a problem and just want to solve it. Some of the challenges that we get with CRD filtering is that it has to be, as far as I can tell, and I've been like leading the architecture of Crossplane for 4 years, so I'm fairly confident in my assessment. As far as I can tell, you would have to build filtering into both Crossplane and every provider that wanted to support filtering, which to start with has some weird things of like, provider Terraform doesn't need filtering support. It has literally one managed resource, so I can't. It doesn't really make sense to filter that, but that's fine. Like Crossplane would have to effectively ask providers if they support filtering and then act differently. Whether you basically, otherwise you would end up in a situation where you'd be like, hey, please filter this provider, and the provider would be like, I don't know what filtering is. I'm just going to install everything, which is not a great user experience. I believe that filtering would fundamentally have to be an opt-in system. So a lot of folks are sort of saying, well, filtering could be opt-out. Sorry, I see there's a lot happening in chat. I'm not watching that, so I will check that in a second. I'll stop talking in a second as well. There was initially this idea of take provider AWS, for example. The default behavior of provider AWS could be as it is today. It installs 900 CRDs, and then you can optionally filter it down. I don't think that's a great user experience because just installing provider AWS will break a small cluster today. So I don't think the default experience should be if you don't know about filtering and don't opt into doing filtering, then your cluster breaks. So I do think we'd have to start to get clever to basically switch from all things being enabled by default to all things actually being off by default and having you opt in. And for that to not be a breaking change, we have to add a lot of intelligence to go and try and figure out, okay, what are you actually running today? Let's automatically enable those types. What does your configuration use? Let's enable those types, etc. And an interesting thought exercise for me is that when I try and describe these two approaches as succinctly as possible, describing how filtering works takes like 5 sentences, whereas describing how breaking up providers works takes like 2 or something like that. I do want to mention as well, and I know Chris Farr on the call here and has a good perspective on this. Performance isn't the only reason that we've heard folks want to break up providers. I can say 3 reasons I've heard, and I'd love it if folks would let me know if there are other reasons that I've forgotten or that I'm not aware of yet. Performance seems to be overwhelmingly the big one for folks. I'd say the second most one is the second most prominent reason is security concerns or auditing, or folks who effectively want to turn off CRDs as a defense in depth mechanism to remove capabilities from providers. And then the third reason is a little bit more hazy, just more of a maybe an emotional thing of just, I don't like bloat. I don't like knowing that all of this stuff is being installed that I don't actually want to use. Is anyone aware of any other stuff that I should that I missed there? All right, cool. So I've only had a chance. I've been reaching out to folks that I know have been affected by this, and the pattern I've heard so far basically is that folks who really care mostly about performance, or who are just like, the performance impact is a problem, seem to be feeling pretty good about this proposal, which we believe will eliminate the performance problems. The folks who are concerned about security, well, actually, I'm not going to say this because I don't have confirmation from Chris, but Chris, I was asking you yesterday, I don't know if you saw my response. The reason that you folks at your company really want sort of really fine-grained control over what types are enabled. I believe in the past you've told me that's basically for security auditing. Is that correct? Is there any other sort of reason there?
Yeah, that's correct, and we can have a talk afterwards regarding this. I have a few answers from our security department about this. Yeah, that's correct.
Cool. All right. Well, let's since you and I will get a chance to talk one-on-one later. Let's I think that's a good idea. Let's hold that, and I'll open this to anyone. What do folks think? Does anyone love this proposal? Hate this proposal? Any questions?
If you want, I can add something. So I added overall in the conversation some thoughts about me, and we had a talk today in our cloud engineer team. And one thing we talked about, what happened if we, for example, splitting the big groups, so like EC2 from AWS, Compute GCP, and Networking Azure, also in different providers, because at the moment you see these are the biggest groups, so like 100 CRDs. And if you're splitting them again, so like provider AWS, EC2 Transit Gateway, EC2 VPC, something like this, then you can move a lot of CRDs out, you know, because normally in AWS, people using, I don't know, Transit Gateway or VPC peering stuff and so on, and you can filter more things out so not filtering, but you can put a lot of things back, you know, from the CRD perspective, if you're splitting also the big group.
Yeah, I didn't mention that in design, but it is something that we talked about. I'm not I don't personally feel super strongly for it. I'd like to get a better understanding of let me put it this way. I'm fairly confident that even with those groups being large, each of those groups named, so one of the issues proposed, what we're talking about, just for everyone, is that each of the biggest 3 cloud providers have sort of like a really big meaty group service. So EC2 in AWS maps to about 100 different resources. Google has a similar one called Compute, and Azure has one called Networking, and they're all about 100 resources, 100 CRDs. And those are pretty cool. Like they often have the networking and VPC constructs and things like that in. So they would end up probably being a dependency of the majority of sort of cross-plane deployments. I think for purely performance reasons, as far as I can tell, even if you install those big 3, so the number I've been throwing out there, which is not a very scientific number, and I think it's actually pretty conservative, I'm saying that folks will start seeing issues at around 500 CRDs installed. And obviously Crossplane is not the only thing that drops in CRDs. There's a list in the design doc of a couple of other different tools. So you can kind of see, there you go, like Crossplane by itself without providers about 12, Config Connector and ASO about 200 each, Converto, well, Wistia 14. I'm sure there's other things that it's not like in the order of like 10 CRDs. We're running through some of these numbers. I tried like one of the ones that's somewhat of a really sort of pathological concerning case would be doing anything multi-cloud that depends on these big 3 providers. So at that point, you've got to install the Azure Networking, AWS EC2, and Google Compute sort of core things, and that gets you 300 CRDs kind of at that base. But then, you know, if you take the 500 number where things get wrong, that gives you 200 more CRDs that you can go and install before you're bumping up on that like very conservative number that I'm mentioning. So I actually, one thing we could look at is potentially in future, keeping that as another knob, basically breaking up those big things if it actually becomes a problem and people are starting to bump up with these numbers. Another thing that I'm sort of factoring in here is that, again, this very conservative 500 number is today, and work on fixing the performance problems that we see is not going to stop, and it has not stopped. We expect that Kubernetes 1.7 is going to be much better than 1.26, for example, for these performance issues, because there's folks at Google and folks elsewhere who are slowly chipping away at these. So if what we're tackling is just the performance issues, I actually don't think we really need to break these things up further. If we do need to bring the security issues into scope, we could break them up further, but where my mind starts to go is, well, if ultimately what folks really want for security is this like super tight granular, like I really don't want any type installed that I'm not using, then maybe there are other options. I know folks like Chris and his team already kind of build custom builds at providers, and when I I'm not, I have a degree in security, but I'm not a security expert. When I think about this, I'm like, well, maybe I'd like the code to not be there at all. So maybe it is actually better to like build my own custom provider than just turn off a CRD and still know that the controller code is kind of fine there. So I guess what I'm saying is maybe there's other compromise we can go for here. But I'm also at the same time, I don't think it's a bad idea to break them up further. It's not off the table in my mind at all.
Nick, I want to do a
I
time
think-
check real quick too, because there's only 3 minutes left. So Janya, if you have a comment, you definitely go ahead and grab it. But I wanted to make sure that we're winding down here as we're getting to the end of the session.
Yeah. I think the crux of the proposal is that breaking up providers means we can keep core Crossplane as simple as possible and focused on its core mission. You know, like this proposal essentially, you know, pushes the problem to the packet to the providers, you know, to package yourself in a way that is smaller and simpler to consume. And I fully agree with that. I think, you know, like the filtering approach, you know, we've had a lot of discussions internally. You know, there's a lot of implications around that, introduces a lot more complexity to Crossplane that needs to maintain in the core framework. So this might seem like the less ideal solution for folks who want that one-to-one ratio of installed versus used. But I think it's the most pragmatic one, considering everything.
I will say that that's true. Like, I do think that this keeps Crossplane a simpler system. But I do want to stress, I'm not pushing this because I think it's easier for Crossplane maintainers at the expense of the community or anything like that. I actually think that this is the simplest system for someone who's new to Crossplane to reason about in the first place. One sort of test to that is there aren't any new concepts in this proposal. If today, if someone's new to the Crossplane community, you effectively say, install the providers that you want, and then start building compositions and claims and all that kind of stuff using those providers. And under this proposal, let's say the world has changed in 6 months. We've done this, and someone comes new to the Crossplane community. It's the same thing. We say install the providers that you want, and then start using claims. There's no install the providers that you want, and then if the providers support filtering, make sure to filter appropriately, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When sort of explaining to them. One thing that is still a bit of an unknown to me is we have obviously very strong signal that people care about this problem of installing fewer providers, but we don't yet have a great sort of bucketing of the why. So I think I'll feel very good about this proposal if the majority of people are like, oh yeah, 90+% of folks are like, yeah, we care really just for performance problems, and this solves that. If we dig a little deeper and it turns out it's like 60-40 and 40% of the people actually have like auditing or security concerns and would like really need to not have types installed that they don't use, then we may have to go back to the drawing board here. But I definitely like again, this is maybe there's other folks who maybe this is something that Chris and I should just talk about, because again, he's the only folks that I talk to who really has detailed answers about this. But where I tend to go when people talk about sort of turning off CRDs for security purposes and whatnot is that something that other tools do? When you install Caverno, for example, do folks rebuild Caverno to not install the CRDs that they don't use, or is this a common pattern in the Kubernetes community, or is it sort of unique to Crossplane? Is something that I wonder.
We had an interesting talk with the security guys today regarding this, because you asked this question, and the question was, is Crossplane now built for Kubernetes things, or is Crossplane built for external API things, And then they start arguing like, okay, then we not wanted to talk about other controllers in the Kubernetes universe because they are built for Kubernetes resources, And Crossplane is a little bit different from the security perspective, because you are managing resources in other APIs or in other clouds, So it's not the same for them if you're talking with the security guys. That's why we have such problems with them.
Yeah, I thought that might be the case. And I kind of get that, but arguably Kubernetes is going and, running a container on something in your cloud, most likely, and it's setting up a service and a load balancer, most likely, and like a lot of operators do go in towards the cloud that aren't Crossplane. So I kind of get it, but also I push back a little bit, I think.
Yeah, but we can have a talk about this.
Yeah.
All right, sweet. So we're a little bit over time now. So I want to wrap things up here. So this proposal is, open right now. And so, this is a really good opportunity to, talk to Nick, the author of the proposal, get some of these questions answered, start the discussion going here in a synchronous fashion. But there is an opportunity, for a bit still, for async discussion as well on the proposal. So if you have comments and more questions and stuff, please do add them to the proposal that's linked in the agenda document. It's pull request 3939, so easy enough to remember, and we can certainly keep the discussion going there as well. Bob, you had another agenda item about, is it possible to decouple package dependencies from a specific registry? Is that something that can wait till next community meeting, or we can keep going on in an async fashion until then, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, that can wait. It's just an issue that came up that I wanted to get a little bit of discussion around, but I have to run as well, so it's not a problem to let it wait 2 weeks.
Cool. I'll put it on the backlog then as the first topic there.
I just wanted to mention on the sort of breaking up providers proposal, I am talking to a bunch of folks one-on-one about this. If I haven't reached out to you already or your team already, and you are feeling pain from this, I have, like, if you prefer a high bandwidth conversation with me, do reach out and I'll try and make it work. I'm out a lot of next week, but I'll do my best to set up a call with you.
Awesome, Nick. Yeah, thanks for making yourself accessible then for more discussions. And I definitely appreciate the way that we're, trying to socialize this, discuss this, listen to things, and make a good decision here. So yeah, great proposal as well, Nick. As usual, great write-up, and really, thought through a lot of the cases here. So this has been really good, and thanks for sharing this with us. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and adjourn. Let's go ahead and wrap up for the week here, and we will meet again, I think, right before the release for on April 25th. So we will see you all, hopefully some of you in Amsterdam as well, and see you all in person and hang out at KubeCon. All right, take care, everybody.
Bye.